Listen close. This is one of those stories that grabs you by the throat and refuses to let go. A romance forged in ice and fire so powerful, it'll leave you reeling, played out against the vast, merciless backdrop of the Old West Plains. This is the country where blizzards bury hope, where danger rides just over the next ridge, and where two strangers, one running from the past, one carrying the weight of the land itself, collide in the worst possible moment. It all kicks off with the violent crash of a stagecoach in a blinding snowstorm. One heartbeat, one wreck, one chance that neither of them saw coming. Before we ride into this tale, drop a like if you're ready, and comment below. Where are you joining me from today? The frontier had its own cruel way of showing folks just how tiny they were against the endless sky. Quill Severn knew bitter East Coast winters, those sharp, stinging winds that clawed at her face on the walk to the little schoolhouse. But nothing back there had ever come close to the roaring white wall that charged across the open land as the stage rattled west. It started with an eerie hush. The sky turned lead gray. The horses' snorted eyes rolling white with fear. Gritch the driver muttered curses under his breath and lashed the reins like he could outrun the blizzard itself. Quill clasped her gloved hands tight beneath her heavy traveling cloak, staring as a thick curtain of snow rolled in from the far edge of the world. Everything held its breath. Then the wind hit hard. It slammed the coach sideways, lifting one wheel clean off the frozen ruts and throwing Quill hard against the seat. The whole rig bucked like a wild bronc, the ground heaving beneath them. Snow battered the windows with the fury of talons raking glass. "Hold tight!" Gritch bellowed, but the gale swallowed his shout whole. The team screamed in terror, their cries lost in the roar. Another gust hammered them fiercer still. Quill felt the coach lurch, violently heard the sharp crack of splintering wood. Before she could suck in a full breath, the world flipped. The stage rolled. She was flung against the opposite bench, then the roof, then the floor, spinning through a dizzy blur of shadow and blinding white. The final crash rang in her skull like a gunshot. For long seconds she lay stunned, unable to move, unable to think nothing but the frantic thud of her own heart. Time blurred. When she finally forced herself upright, snow blasted through the shattered door, burying the overturned coach in drifts. Pain knifed through her ankle as she clawed her way out of the wreckage and into the open. The cold struck like a fist. Wind sliced straight through her cloak, turning every breath into jagged ice. The world was nothing but howling white chaos. She could barely see her own hand stretched in front of her face. The horses were gone. Gritch was gone, either swallowed by the storm or dragged off by the panicked team. Panic surged hot in Quill's chest despite the freezing air. "Help," she cried, but the wind stole the word before it left her lips. She tried to stand. Her ankle buckled instantly, dumping her face first into a drift that swallowed her to the waist. Gasping, shaking, she fought free, the cold already seeping through wool and straight into bone. Folks had warned her about plains blizzards, how they could strip a person's heat, in minutes bury a grown man alive. She'd nodded, thinking the stage would keep her safe, the road would hold. Now there was no road, no horizon, no direction, just endless, blinding white. Quill staggered on every step, a war against the wind. Her fingers locked stiff. Her face first burned, then went dead. She pressed her sleeve across her nose and mouth, dragging shallow breaths through the fabric. The storm howled like a living thing, tearing at her cloak, like shredded flags, blurring every thought except one: keep moving. But her legs turned to lead. Each inhale scorched deeper. Overhead, the sky churned into black snow, thick as chimney smoke. She stumbled again, and this time she stayed down. Some stubborn part of her screamed to get up, not to sleep, not to give in to the dangerous warmth stealing through her bones. Yet her body felt far away, weightless. Just 1 second of rest, she thought. Just one. Her eyes drifted shut. Then a shape cut through the white. At first she wasn't sure it was real, just a tall, powerful outline, moving steady against the gale. Wrapped in thick hides, long, dark hair whipping behind like a battle flag. He didn't fight the wind. He moved with it as though the plains themselves had shaped him. Quill blinked, half convinced her mind had conjured him. Then he dropped to one knee beside her. A deep voice, warm despite everything, spoke words she couldn't catch. Strong arms lifted her out of the snow, pulling her tight against a broad chest that poured heat like a stove. The last thing she registered before darkness rushed in again was the slow, steady drum of a heartbeat beneath her ear, calm, unshakable, promising she wasn't alone anymore. Then the storm took her completely. When Quill next floated toward wakefulness, warmth reached her first real, living warmth. The kind that only comes from firewalls and someone else's beating heart. It wrapped around her like a thick blanket, thawing the bone-deep ice that had claimed her. The wild shriek of the blizzard was gone, replaced by the soft crackle of burning wood and the dull thump of wind against solid shelter. Her lashes, heavy with frost, cracked open. Firelight danced across rough log walls. The air smelled of pine smoke and something earthy she couldn't place. She wasn't outside anymore. Someone had carried her here. The realization hit fast. She tried to sit up only to hiss as pain lanced through her ankle. A steady hand caught her shoulder, strong yet careful. "Easy now," a low voice said. "Don't move too quick." Quill tensed. Her gaze followed the arm muscled wrapped in worn hide, up to a face half-shadowed by the glow. A tall man sat beside her unmistakably of the people who called this hard land home. Long dark hair tied loosely back, strands falling across sharp cheekbones, eyes dark and steady as riverstone, watched her, not threatening, just watchful. "You're safe," he said simply, his English clear, but carrying the cadence of someone raised far from cities. Quill swallowed, heart hammering. She'd read the penny dreadfuls, the wild tales printed back east that painted men like him as savages. But the man in front of her didn't match a single word of those stories. He sat easy gaze, level voice, calm. Where am I?" she whispered. He shifted to feed another stick to the small fire. "Hunting shelter. My people use it when the snows come heavy." He glanced at her. "You were dying out there. I brought you in." Heat crept into her cheeks, hopefully, only from the fire. "You saved me." He gave a small nod. Anyone would have frozen left in that drift. She didn't know what to say. Gratitude, fear, confusion twisted together inside her chest. He turned his attention to her ankle, already wrapped neatly in strips torn from his own hide shirt. "Twisted bad." "Not broken," he said. "You need to stay off it." Quill looked around the small shelter, barely room for the fire. 2 bedrolls, a few hunting tools. The wind battered the walls, but couldn't get inside. Light came only from the flames and a small smoke hole above. She realized, with a strange flutter, that this man had carried her through that hell of a storm, his broad shoulders wide enough to break the worst of it. He stood then, moving with quiet purpose. From a corner he brought a wooden bowl of warm, herb-soaked water. Kneeling again, he dipped a cloth and gently pressed it to her hands, her face wiping away the last traces of frost. She flinched at the first touch. He didn't pull back. "Korven," he said quietly. "That's my name." Quill blinked up at him. "Quill Severn. I was heading to Fort Lincoln. To teach." He nodded once. "The storm took your trail. Good thing you didn't keep walking. Snow buries people fast." She knew he was right, and she knew without him she'd already be just another sad story whispered back east. As he worked, Quill studied him. His movements were careful, respectful, never hurried. Firelight caught the strong line of his jaw, the faint scar near his temple, the quiet power in his arms. He carried no showy weapons, just a knife at his belt and a bow leaning against the wall. A man used to danger, yet he tended her with a gentleness that surprised her. "You didn't have to stop for me," she said softly. Most wouldn't. Something moved in his expression. Not pride, not boast, just something deep and old. "A life's a life," he answered simply. "The storm don't care who it takes. I do." The plain words hit her harder than the wind ever had. Outside, the blizzard raged on, pounding the shelter. Inside, Quill felt the fire's heat and the steady presence of the man who'd risked his own life to save hers. She pulled the hide blanket, closer eyes still on Korven. For the first time since the coach turned over, she let herself believe she might actually live through the night. The roar of the blizzard had died away, leaving only the soft snap and pop of burning logs and the faint, muffled howl of wind pressing against sturdy walls. Quill's lashes were crusted with ice. When she finally pried them open, a warm orange glow flickered across rough split timbers overhead. The air carried the sharp bite of wood smoke, the clean tang of pine resin, and something deeper, wild, earthy, unfamiliar. She wasn't out in the open anymore. Someone had brought her inside. The truth hit her like a sudden gust. She tried to push herself up, and pain lanced straight through her ankle. A low groan escaped before she could stop it. Before she could collapse back, a firm hand settled on her shoulder, strong, yet careful, almost tender. "Take it slow," a deep, steady voice said. No sudden moves. Quill went rigid. Her eyes followed the arm, broad, corded with muscle wrapped in worn hide, up to a face half lit by firelight. A tall man sat close beside her, every line of him speaking of the hard country that shaped him. Long dark hair pulled back loosely a few strands, falling across high, sharp cheekbones. His eyes dark, steady, as polished stone, watched her with calm alertness. Not threat. "You're safe now," he said, reading the fear in her posture. His English was clear-edged with the rhythm of someone raised far from towns or telegraph lines. Quill swallowed pulse hammering in her throat. Back east, she'd devoured every newspaper tale about savage warriors, stories spun by men who'd never left the safety of their printing presses. They painted men like him as brutal, bloodthirsty. But the man sitting here didn't fit a single one of those lurid sketches. He sat, easy shoulders relaxed, gaze level, voice even. Where am I?" she managed, voice barely above a whisper. He reached over and fed another stick to the fire. "Hunting shelter. My people stop here when the snows turn mean." He met her eyes. "You were close to gone out there. I carried you in." Heat flooded her face. She prayed it was only the fire. "You saved my life." He gave a single quiet nod. "You'd have frozen solid if I'd left you in that drift." Words tangled in her throat. Gratitude, fear, bewilderment, all knotted together. He turned his attention to her ankle, already bound neatly with strips torn from his own hide shirt. "Twisted, not broken," he said. "You need to stay off it for now." Quill glanced around the small space. Barely big enough for the fire pit, 2 bedrolls, and a handful of hunting gear. The wind shoved against the log walls but couldn't break through. Light came only from the flames and a narrow smoke hole near the roof. A strange flutter stirred in her chest as she realized this man, this towering figure with shoulders broad enough to shield her from the worst of the gale, had carried her through that frozen hell. He rose then, moving with the same quiet efficiency she'd already come to notice. From a shadowed corner, he brought a wooden bowl filled with warm water steeped in fragrant herbs. Kneeling again, he soaked a cloth and gently pressed it to her hands, then her face wiping away the last traces of Frost's cruel bite. She flinched at the first contact. He didn't withdraw. "Korven," he said, voice low and even. "That's what they call me." Quill blinked up at him. "Quill Severn. I was headed to Fort Lincoln to take a teaching position." He nodded once. "The storm swallowed your trail. Good you didn't keep trying to push on. Snow covers people fast." She knew he spoke the truth, and she knew bone deep that without him, she'd already be nothing more than a sad headline carried east on the next mail stage. As he worked, Quill watched him more closely. Every motion was deliberate, respectful, careful not to startle her. Firelight carved the strong angles of his jaw, caught the faint scar at his temple, traced the quiet power in his forearms. He carried no flashy weapons, just a plain knife at his belt and a bow resting against the far wall. A man who knew danger intimately, yet he tended her wounds with a gentleness that caught her off guard. "You didn't have to stop for me," she said quietly. "Most folks wouldn't." Something passed across his face, not pride, not bragging, but something older, deeper. "A life is a life," he answered simply. "The storm doesn't pick sides. I do." The plain weight of his words landed heavier than any wind gust. Outside, the blizzard still hammered the shelter. Inside, Quill felt the steady warmth of the fire and the calm, unshakable presence of the man who'd gambled his own life to pull her from death. She drew the thick hide blanket tighter around her shoulders, eyes lingering on Korven. For the first time since the coach had flipped, she let herself believe, really believe, that she might make it through the night. Quill drifted in that hazy space between sleep and waking, wrapped in a warmth she hadn't known since she was a little girl, curled up by the old stone fireplace back home. For a long stretch, she didn't question it, just lay there, letting the steady heat melt the last stubborn shards of cold buried deep in her bones. Then the warmth shifted. Not sudden, not jarring, just a slow, gentle rise and fall under her cheek. A rhythm, a heartbeat. Her eyes snapped open. At first, all she saw was the low red glow of the fire embers pulsing like dying coals. Her cheek was pressed to something solid and warm, not wool, not hide, but skin. Her hand, half curled near her chest, brushed the smooth, hard plane of a man's torso. Her breath snagged in her throat. She wasn't lying on blankets. She was lying against a man. Her head jerked up on instinct, and she found herself staring straight into a pair of dark, steady eyes, calm, wide awake, and watching her with the patient stillness of someone who'd been keeping watch for hours. Korven didn't flinch, didn't look embarrassed or surprised by her sudden panic. He simply blinked once, slow and deliberate, like he was ready for whatever came next. "You're awake," he said softly. Quill jerked back in a rush of mortified heat, but her injured ankle screamed in protest, and the blankets twisted around her legs. She winced, sinking back onto the bedroll with a sharp hiss. Korven's hands came up at once, not touching her, just hovering there, a quiet offer of help if she wanted it. It took her several pounding heartbeats to find her voice. "I'm so sorry," she stammered. "I didn't mean I wasn't. Why was I—" "You were freezing again," he said, cutting through her spiral before it could spin out of control. The fire had burned down low. "You were shaking hard." He paused, searching her face to make sure the truth landed. "I held you. It was the only way to keep you warm enough." Her face burned hotter than the flames ever could. "But you were awake," she whispered. His expression stayed steady. "I slept some. Not much." You kept shivering. Quill swallowed hard. She'd read about trappers and mountain men sharing body heat in blizzards. Blankets alone weren't always enough. But reading about it was one thing. Waking up pressed against the bare chest of a man like Korven was something else entirely. She dared a quick glance. He'd pulled his heavy hide cloak over them both, draping it loosely. His body was angled just enough so she could rest against him without putting her full weight on him. He'd been careful enough that she hadn't even realized she was sleeping skin to skin until now. I don't know. Moved, she murmured, embarrassment flooding her. You would have fallen, he said plainly, and the cold would have come right back. This was safer. Safer. Logical. Sensible. Nothing about him felt careless or wrong. If anything, he looked quietly uneasy at the thought that she might think he'd taken advantage of her weakness. His jaw held a calm dignity. His posture stayed respectful, even after the closeness they'd shared. Quill let out a slow breath, willing her racing heart to settle. Her fingers tightened on the edge of the blanket. Thank you, she said at last. Korven dipped his head in quiet acknowledgement. You've got strength in you, but you're not used to this country yet. The wind here takes whatever it wants unless you fight back. Her gaze softened. And you fought it for me. He looked away for a moment, eyes tracking the sparks drifting up from the fire. You were alone out there. I couldn't walk away. A heavy silence settled between them, not awkward, just full. Quill could hear his breathing slow and even. She still felt the ghost of his warmth on her cheek. The closeness had rattled her, sure, but not in the way she'd feared it might. Instead, something inside her had shifted. Something quiet, fragile, and hard to put a name to. She watched as he stood to add more wood to the fire. His back was to her now, firelight tracing the powerful outline of his shoulders and the long, lean muscle beneath. This was a man carved by the open land, hardened by storms, toughened by hard years, rooted in a steady, quiet strength. Before she could talk herself out of it, the words slipped out. You didn't sleep so you could keep watch over me. He didn't turn. Storm nights are mean. Better if someone stays awake. You didn't have to be the one. This time he looked back at her. Something warmer flickered beneath his calm surface, just a spark. But it was there. Yes, he said simply. I did. Her breath caught. Outside, the storm groaned and shoved at the walls. Inside, the quiet grew thicker. A different kind of warmth bloomed slow, steady, and nothing to do with the fire. For the first time since she'd come to in this place, Quill wasn't thinking about the cold, or the danger, or how far she was from everything she'd ever known. She was thinking about him. By mid-morning, the worst of the blizzard had blown itself out. What was left was a heavy, swirling wind that bent the pines and sent snow devils dancing across the ground, but it no longer threatened to scour the whole country clean. Inside the little hunting cabin, everything felt transformed, safer, warmer, and carrying an unexpected closeness that hung in the air like smoke. Quill sat bundled in thick blankets, cradling a tin cup of strong, bitter herb tea Korven had brewed. Each swallow sent a welcome burn down her throat, spreading heat and a deep, grounding earthiness that anchored her firmly in the here and now. Her ankle ached steadily, but the sharp, stabbing jolts had finally eased. She couldn't help but admire how carefully he'd tended her. The cloth bandage around her foot was just right, snug enough to brace it loose enough to let blood flow. When she stole glances at him stacking firewood, sharpening a small tool, moving with quiet purpose, she saw the depth of his care. It wasn't only bandages and warmth. It reached deeper, easing her fear in ways she hadn't expected. Every motion he made seemed thoughtful, deliberate, as if he weighed each one against her comfort and peace of mind. She tried to hold herself back, reminding herself he was still a stranger, a man forged in a wild world she only knew from fragments of stories and newspaper sketches. Yet when she caught him watching her, not judging, not demanding anything, just a soft, steady concern, she felt something inside her shift, a quiet tilt of the heart that surprised her. "You should rest," he said, breaking the hush. His voice was calm, measured, carrying the clear cadence of someone who spoke only when the words mattered. "The snow's gonna stick around for hours. Moving now would be asking for trouble." Quill nodded, but curiosity burned stronger than caution. "You put yourself in danger to come after me, didn't you?" He didn't hesitate. "I did. You were out there alone in that storm. I couldn't turn my back." His tone stayed even, but there was a weight behind it, something that said the words carried more than they seemed. In that moment, Quill understood this man lived by a code different from the folks back east. Out here, honor wasn't in fancy talk or worried glances. It lived in what you did when no one was watching. Life came down to the choice: step in or step aside. The cabin was tiny, but it no longer felt confining. The fire cast a warm, steady glow into the corners, stretching long shadows across the log walls. Korven had spread an extra blanket on the floor near her, close enough she could reach for support. If she needed it far enough, her space stayed her own. Nothing about his movements felt rushed or careless. She found herself watching him without meaning to, how his hands flexed with quiet strength as he worked the focused intensity in his dark eyes, the slow, even rhythm of his breathing. "Tell me your name," she said softly but firmly, cutting through the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "Korven," he answered simply. Quill drew a small breath. "Quill Severn. I was on my way to Fort Lincoln, to teach school." She trailed off the memory of the wrecked stagecoach rushing back like a cold wind. He gave a single nod. "I saw what was left of it. You're lucky the storm didn't claim you before I got there." Quill bit her lip, caught between wanting to thank him again and feeling the weight of how much she'd already leaned on him. "I mean it, thank you. Truly." He dipped his head, but offered no more words. No grand story of the rescue, no proud recounting. That quiet restraint unsettled her in a way she hadn't expected. She realized this calm, reserved man didn't chase praise. His courage was plain, understated, spoken in actions instead of boasts. Hours slipped by in the shelter, marked by small, steady kindnesses. He passed her sips of warm water, pulled another blanket closer, when the fire dipped low, even shared strips of dried meat to keep her strength up. In return, Quill found herself talking not just about the journey, but about home, her life back east, the world she'd left behind. She started cautious, unsure how much to share with a stranger. But Korven listened with complete attention, nodding now and then, never cutting in, never pressing for more than she offered. A gentle understanding grew between them, delicate but real. Quill realized she hadn't really laughed in weeks, maybe months. Yet here, with the man who'd pulled her from death, she caught herself smiling softly, easily, without thinking. When she looked up and found his eyes on her, she saw him smile back. Not wide, not showy, just a small lift at the corners that carried quiet approval. And something deeper she couldn't quite name. Outside, the storm still howled, refusing to quit. But inside the little cabin, Quill felt a safety she hadn't known since leaving home, a sense that for the first time in a long while, she wasn't facing everything alone. And though they'd started as strangers, she sensed the moment had woven something between them neither had seen coming. Two lives thrown together by chance, and the fury of the frontier, the cabin had become more than shelter. It was the first thin bridge between her world of rules and refinement, and his of raw wilderness and unbreakable honor. In that small fire-warmed space, the quiet bond they shared began to take root. The storm finally started to lose its teeth. The wind dropped to a low, mournful moan rolling across the open land. But for Quill, the world beyond the cabin walls had suddenly grown darker, more treacherous. Every snow-drifted rise, every tree bowed under white weight, looked like an obstacle, a snare or a hiding place for something waiting to strike. The thought squeezed her chest tight. A chill fear crept over Quill like frost on glass, even as the fire at their backs kept the cabin snug and warm. Korven moved through the small space with the natural ease of a man born and raised in this unforgiving country. He gathered extra blankets, poked the fire into brighter life, then knelt beside her to check her ankle one more time. His eyes were steady measuring, but his voice stayed even and calm. "The storm's moving on," he said. "But trouble doesn't leave with it. You're not ready to travel alone yet." Quill swallowed hard, fingers tightening on the blanket's edge. "I can make it," she said, though. The shake in her voice gave her away. She'd spent her life in schoolrooms, not on the open range. Every step beyond these walls felt like walking into the unknown. He shook his head gently. "No. You got lucky once. Luck won't carry you far out here. There are men without honor roaming these trails," he added quietly. "They hunt stragglers." Her pulse jumped. Outlaws Korven's mouth tightened into a thin line. "Yes. Along the old stage routes. They hit the weak and the slow. I've crossed paths with them before. They're dangerous and smart." Quill's heart hammered not just from fear, but from the cold realization that he wasn't exaggerating. This land was raw, ruthless, and it showed no mercy. Yet the terror eased in his presence, his calm, deliberate movements. The quiet power that seemed to surround him made it impossible not to feel safer just standing near him. He held out a hand, strong, steady, sure. "I'll see you through. We go together. No faster than you can step. No slower than the snow lets us." Her mind spun. Turning him down would be pure foolishness. Accepting meant putting her life in the hands of a man she barely knew, a stranger who had already pulled her back from death. But the idea of facing the open land alone without him scared her far worse. She reached out and took his hand. A quiet warmth spread through her deeper than any fire could give. They started out carefully. The drifts towered higher than anything Quill had ever seen, snow crunching under their boots with every step. Korven's eyes never stopped moving, sweeping the horizon, catching every shift in the wind, every faint crack of a branch, every sound that might mean danger. He walked in silence, but the steady rhythm of his stride, the sure way he picked a path through the drifts, filled her with quiet wonder. "You trust me," he said low, not asking, just stating a fact. Quill nodded. "I do." His gaze flicked to hers for a heartbeat, and she caught the tiniest lift at the corner of his mouth, a small, private sign of acknowledgement, almost like a secret shared between them. Out here, trust wasn't asked for. It was earned one careful step, one watchful glance, one moment of standing guard at a time. Hours slipped past. In places the snow thinned, exposing jagged, barren ground beneath. Then Korven froze suddenly, dropping low behind a snowbank. Quill followed without thinking, heart slamming against her ribs. "Quiet," he whispered. His dark eyes tracked a distant ridge. A thin plume of dust rose there, horses moving fast and deliberate, too purposeful to be anything but hunters. Outlaws. Quill breathed fear spiking sharp in her chest. Korven didn't flinch. He reached smoothly for the bow slung across his back, every motion controlled, precise. No panic, just readiness. "Stay down," he said. "Don't move unless I tell you. Don't give them a target." Her pulse roared in her ears, but she obeyed. His steady presence beside her anchored the rising panic. In that frozen instant, she understood something vital. Survival out here wasn't just about courage. It was about trust, about standing together when the world turned hostile. They weren't strangers anymore. Their paths had crossed in the storm, and now the fragile bond between them had become the thin line that might keep them both alive. The riders drew closer. Korven signaled her to follow, gliding across the snow with fluid, silent steps that seemed impossible in the deep drifts. Quill pushed herself to keep up ankle-burning, but fear and adrenaline gave her strength she didn't know she had. They wouldn't reach Fort Lincoln by wishful thinking or blind luck. But with Korven beside her, every hard-won step felt like quiet rebellion against the storm, against the danger, against this merciless land. Fear still surged through her, but so did something stronger, raw awe, and the first faint spark of admiration for the man who had already risked everything to save her. As the ridge loomed closer and the riders' shadows grew darker, Quill realized a truth she hadn't seen coming. She didn't want to face this danger alone. And deeper still, she didn't want to face the rest of her life on these wild plains without Korven by her side. The open land stretched out forever, white, brutal, and unforgiving, yet somehow it felt more alive with him walking next to her. Each step was a careful bargain with the snow. Each breath hung in the freezing air, a sharp reminder of how close she had come to losing everything. Quill's ankle throbbed with every step, a steady burning reminder, but Korven's solid presence at her side poured courage into her she hadn't known she owned. A strange blend of wonder and relief washed over her. She was starting to move the way this hard country demanded, slow, deliberate, with a quiet respect for its merciless ways. Korven led without a word most of the time, only breaking the silence with a low warning or a quick observation. He seemed woven into the land itself, catching the brittle crunch of ice beneath their boots, reading the long shadows thrown by distant pines, hearing the faintest shift in the wind that promised a change in the weather. His understanding of the terrain felt effortless, almost born into him, as if the wide-open land had whispered its secrets directly into his bones. "You're doing good," he said once, glancing back with the barest lift at the corners of his mouth. "Better than most folks who didn't grow up out here." Quill blinked, caught off guard by the praise. She managed a small smile. "I've got a good guide." Her heart lifted at the quiet approval in his voice. He gave a single nod, no elaboration, no fuss, and she understood in his world, words of praise were rare, saved for moments truly earned. Every syllable, every small gesture carried real weight, and that weight only deepened her respect for him. As the hours wore on, the sharp edge of their escape softened into a careful rhythm. Korven would push ahead a few paces, then look back to make sure she was still with him. In sheltered dips, they paused to rest, and in those quiet breaks, conversation began to flow. He asked about her life back east, not prying, just genuinely curious. She told him about her family, her dream of teaching the small town she'd left behind. In return, she glimpsed pieces of his world, the brother he'd lost last winter, the ways his people hunted and endured the long, brutal seasons, the patient wisdom carved from years of watching and listening to the land. Each shared story pulled her closer, not only to him, but to the wild country around them. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the snow in soft pinks and molten gold, they stopped on a ridge above a frozen river. Quill eased down onto a drift, shivering despite the layers of blankets and hides. Korven knelt beside her, pulling a small pouch from his pack. "Eat," he said, offering strips of dried meat and a few pieces of hard journey bread. You need the strength." She hesitated only a second before hunger took over. As she ate, he watched her with a calm, focused attention that set her pulse fluttering. She realized she'd been starving for more than food, for the simple feeling of being truly seen by someone who understood what really counted. "You're brave," he said, after she'd eaten enough for color to return to her cheeks. His eyes met hers, steady and sure. Plenty of folks would have quit long before now. Warmth bloomed in her chest, stronger than the nearby fire. "I never thought of myself as brave," she admitted quietly. "Bravery ain't always loud," he answered. "Sometimes it's just quiet. Sometimes it's putting one foot in front of the other when you're scared half to death." The words wrapped around her like armor. For the first time in days, she let herself truly relax in his company. She noticed the small things, now the even calm of his breathing, the way the fading sunlight caught in his eyes, the subtle power in every careful movement he made. Later, when night fell, and they camped in a sheltered stand of trees, Quill knew she trusted him completely. She would follow him across this endless land without hesitation, because with him nearby, fear shrank to something she could face, and hope felt real enough to touch. And with a rush of warmth she couldn't quite name, she realized she felt something more, something private, deep stirring beyond simple gratitude or safety. They lay side by side under the blankets, the fire snapping softly between them. Listening to his steady breathing, she understood their connection had grown in ways neither could have predicted. The storm had thrown them together. Danger had forged their trust, and the long, hard miles had begun to weave something delicate yet unbreakable between them. That night, Quill closed her eyes not just in exhaustion, but in quiet wonder at the vast plains, at the man who'd saved her life, and at the strange, powerful pull that now bound her to Korven. For the first time, she let herself imagine a future that included him not only as her protector, but as something closer, something deeper. And in the deep hush of the snowy land, Korven's steady presence wrapped around her like a promise they were no longer two strangers passing through. They were traveling as one, facing the wild and its dangers together. The sun had just cleared the horizon, throwing long, jagged shadows across the frozen ground, when Korven stopped short on a ridge overlooking a narrow bend in the river. Quill, still blinking against the sharp morning light, followed his gaze and went rigid. A thin cloud of dust rose in the distance, horses moving fast and deliberate across the snow. Her stomach knotted. The outlaws. Korven dropped low, silent, as a shadow eyes locked on the approaching threat. He motioned for her to do the same. Her heart slammed in her ears, but she obeyed, without thought, trusting his instincts more than her own shaking nerves. "Stay low," he whispered, voice calm, but edged with urgency. "Don't move unless I say." Quill's mind raced. She was no gunfighter, no scout. She'd survived a blizzard, but this was different. This was danger riding straight toward them, cold and intentional. Yet right beside her, Korven carried a steady calm that pushed the danger back a notch. His hands rested easy on his bow, not gripped white-knuckled, not rigid, just poised and ready. Every line of his body held coiled control like a spring set, but not yet sprung. The outlaws were closing fast now. Quill caught flashes of hard shapes through the snow haze, rough riders, metal glinting cold in the pale dawn light. Fear roared through her, but beneath it burned a strange, sharp thrill. She was seeing raw courage laid bare, the real thing, no bluster or show. Korven didn't flinch, didn't rush. He simply read the moment, waited, and prepared. "They'll try to ford the river here," he murmured low. "We can't let them get around us. Stay right here, quiet, ready." Quill nodded, mouth dry as dust hands shaking. She had no gun, no fight in her like that, but she could watch, listen, and trust. And for the first time she truly understood this trust wasn't blind faith. It had been hammered out through shared cold nights, hard miles, and the quiet proof of his steady judgment and strength. The lead horse splashed into view at the river's edge, the rider sweeping sharp eyes along the ridges for any sign of trouble. Korven lifted a hand, pointing to a narrow trail hugging the bank. "When they hit the shallows, we hit together," he said. Time stretched thin and taut, each heartbeat pounding like a drum in her ears. She heard the crunch of hooves breaking crusty snow, the soft clink of spurs and bridle metal carrying on the cold air. Korven's gaze never wavered from the riders. His focus was iron, unbreakable. As the lead man reached the crossing, Korven moved like water over stone, smooth, swift, certain. He drew an arrow, nocked it in one fluid motion, and released. The shot made almost no sound, just a soft hiss until it struck. The outlaw jerked, stunned. His horse shied hard, throwing the others into confusion for a heartbeat. Now Korven breathed. Heart-slamming, Quill scooped a fist-sized stone from the snow and hurled it at the nearest rider. It was small, desperate, almost laughable against their guns and numbers, but Korven's eyes flicked to her with a quick, bright spark of approval. That tiny act mattered. The outlaws faltered, regrouping, but Korven was already shifting. He guided her up behind a low snow mound, every step measured, every move planned. When one rider tried to swing wide and flank them, Korven cut him off with a fast, precise shift, driving the man back toward the river and out of position. Quill watched in quiet awe. This wasn't just survival. It was a deadly dance, perfect timing, pure skill, absolute trust. Every quick glance Korven sent her way, every low command was sharp and deliberate. She didn't need to understand the full strategy. She only needed to follow, and she did. At last, the outlaws saw their advantage slipping. They wheeled their horses, cut their losses, and vanished across the white expanse, leaving only drifting dust hoofprints and the fading echo of threat. Quill let out a long, trembling breath and sank against the snowbank. Korven was at her side in an instant, hand firm on her shoulder. "You're not hurt," he said simply, voice level and sure. No pride in it, no bragging, just plain fact, as though the outcome had been the only reasonable result of clear thinking and nerve. Quill looked up at him, awe and relief crashing together. "I can't believe we got through that," she whispered. Korven's dark eyes held hers steady, unreadable for a moment, then softened just a fraction. "You handled yourself well," he said. "Better than plenty of men who've ridden this country." Heat rose in her cheeks. Not from the cold. Not entirely. In the heat of that danger, something had taken root between them. Not just trust, but something richer. Dependence, respect, and the barest hint of something warmer, unspoken. As the morning sun climbed higher and began melting the snow along the riverbank, Quill felt the truth settle deep. Korven had saved her more than once, not only from the blizzard and the riders, but from the fear that had threatened to swallow her whole. He had shown her courage, calm, and the kind of quiet strength that could steady another soul in the wildest storm. Now, standing with him on the frozen plain, she felt a fierce, wordless certainty. Whatever lay ahead, she would meet it with him, not as strangers, but as true partners. The snow had softened to fine, sparkling powder under the rising sunlight, scattering across the open land like spilled diamonds. Quill and Korven had camped near a small stand of trees, the river bend behind them, now peaceful, the outlaws long gone. The sharp tension of the night had melted away, leaving quiet reflection and a fragile, hard-won peace. Quill stretched her stiff muscles, the ache in her ankle still there, but bearable now. She glanced at Korven, who sat honing the small knife he carried, his motions slow, precise, almost meditative. Even in these simple things, he carried the same unshakable calm that had carried her through the blizzard and the fight at the river. In a sudden rush of clarity, she saw how much she had come to lean on him, not only for safety but for strength, direction, and the simple comfort of his nearness. "You've taught me more than I ever thought possible," she said softly, breaking the stillness. He looked up, dark eyes meeting hers steadily. "Have I?" She nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "About this land, about courage, about trust." She paused, feeling the weight of what came next. "About myself." Korven's gaze warmed just a touch, a faint glow at the edges of his steady expression. He set the knife aside and came to kneel beside her. "And what have you learned about me?" Korven asked, his voice low and steady. Quill's breath caught. She searched for words that could carry her across the space between simple thanks and something far deeper. "That courage isn't always loud," she whispered, echoing his own quiet wisdom. "Sometimes it's silent. Sometimes it's steady, patient, never backing down. I see it in you, Korven." He held her gaze for a long moment, the fire's glow or maybe the morning sun catching in his dark eyes. Then, with careful gentleness, he reached out and brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. The touch was light, unhurried, yet it sent a warm shiver racing through her that had nothing to do with sunlight or flames. "You've stared down fear Quill," he said softly. "And you're still standing. That's courage all by itself." She dropped her eyes, heat blooming across her cheeks. "I only made it because of you," she admitted. "Because you never left me to face it alone." For the first time, a faint, almost hidden smile touched Korven's lips. He reached further, closing his hand around hers, firm, respectful, yet carrying a promise that went beyond words, protection, partnership, something neither of them had named yet. They stayed like that for a long stretch, the wide-open land rolling out around them in every direction, a silent witness to the fragile growing thing between them. Quill felt a rush of feeling she'd never known before, relief, deep respect, and the first tentative stirrings of love. Looking into Korven's calm, unwavering eyes, she understood everything that had happened. The blizzard, the snow, the danger hadn't just tested her. It had led her straight here. To him. "You saved me," she said at last, voice trembling just a little. "More than once. Not just from the storm, not just from those riders. From my own fear. From myself." Korven's fingers tightened around hers, a quiet, certain answer. "And you've shown me something," he replied. "That even in this rough country there's still kindness, strength, hope. You've shown me that." The wind moved softly through the pines, carrying the sharp scent of snow and river water. Quill leaned in just a fraction, letting the warmth of his nearness wash over her. For the first time since setting foot on these plains, she felt more than safe. She felt truly seen, understood. And maybe the beginning of something that could last. "I don't want to go back," she said quietly, the words more statement than question. "Not yet. Not without you." Korven's eyes softened completely now, the smallest smile reaching them. "Then stay," he said simply. "This land is hard, but together we'll stand it. No need to go back to who you were before. You've found a place here. With me." Her heart jumped. She let her hand settle fully in his and rose to stand beside him. The sun climbed higher, turning the snow to gold and lighting up the endless plains that would now be theirs to walk together. As they took their first steps forward side by side, Quill knew the storm. The danger, the long, hard miles hadn't just challenged her. They'd brought her to a new beginning, a new dawn shared with Korven. The land was wild, the future uncertain. But in that moment, neither of them feared what lay ahead. They had each other. and that was enough. In the quiet, brilliant light of that morning, two lives that had started as strangers were now bound together strong, certain ready to meet whatever this harsh, beautiful frontier might throw their way. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. We appreciate you more than you think. If this tale stirred something deep inside, we invite you to remain part of this frontier of memories. More true stories of honor, compassion, and destiny are waiting for you here. Subscribe, share, comment, and thank you for riding with us today. Aviso legal barra disclaimer. Our content is designed for artistic and entertainment purposes and may reinterpret historical themes using fictional touches. We apply AI tools thoughtfully only to support production while keeping human supervision over editing, emotional tone, and narrative coherence. We always comply with regulatory guidelines for AI-based media and avoid deepfake practices or identity manipulation. All supporting components remain legally sourced. Please ask for authorization before sharing or adapting any segment. Your respect makes it possible for us to continue telling meaningful stories.